Alright everyone, good evening. This is Rillian, streaming from Rillian2_MK to our main channel 2_MK. This content is being rebroadcast with my full permission. So today what we're looking at is the system we're going to be using to build the AbigailBot. Now since AbigailBot is obviously not in any way known at the moment, and we have some information about Abigail's moves and normals, but not a lot of information about his frame data. It's not possible to immediately know what sort of things will be really important to the bot and what will just be something you don't really see in a real match, or something that you don't see too often used at the lower levels of play. The bot I'm going to be using for this, or actually lack of bot, more accurately, is R.Mika, with the intention of testing out some of the behaviors that Abigail should be using, since she has a couple things that make it possible to test these. She actually does have some already done, I believe. So I'm going to see if I want to keep any of these for the main thing. It's not looking like it very much right now. I got some tricky stuff in there. But based on what we know about Abigail as a character, one of his largest mix-ups is going to come from his nitro charge. And Abigail's nitro charge is a simply pressing multiple kicks. That starts him into his running stance, and then from there he can proceed as normal. So what we've learned in a lot of bot creation is that whether or not you actually hit the button at the end or are holding the button at the end of a recording changes how the game perceives it. If you're familiar with our recently released Boxer bot, you'll know that you can use that information to let him do tap. So, for example, with R.Mika, while she doesn't really have any moves that combo into her charged heavy kick, there are some spacings at which she would think it's a good idea to use it. Let's see. The one I'm most aware of is that technically, while it is not the best of ideas, technically she can do Brimstone into charged heavy kick. Now, this timing is slightly off, but I'll show you what happens if I do it. You have to know the timing. Okay, that's not so terrible though. So there we have her doing that motion quickly. But I did charge the drop kick as long as I could. If I put that to play back by itself, you should be able to see something happen. If I quick rise and then try to do something, crush counter happens. Good. But something looks like the timing's off. Oh well. It could be that the timing of it is off. It could be that since she can hold it for so much longer than standard, it does become an issue. It could be that I have to do this in the corner. There are a lot of different things. But what I'm demonstrating today is related to that and not precisely that. What I'm demonstrating is actually that if R.Mika does this in the corner and does it properly, if I only hit the heavy kick for a very short space of time, a different thing happens. I'm not actually sure that that worked directly as I wanted it to. Let's try it again. So here we have her crouching. It's not clear how long she's going to take to release that kick. Now I'm going to start a different recording in which she basically does that, but I'm holding the kick at the beginning. That'll do. Now what's the reason? Well, if I put 1 to play by itself, what do I get? I get R.Mika that does what appears to be her regular dropkick. If I turn on 2, do I get something different? The idea being that if you are holding it at the end of action 1 and she moves into action 2, she should do a longer charge one. So now you've seen a longer charge one. I'm going to do this by just hitting the heavy kick by itself for a very short time for 2 and then doing the combo. So you saw that I didn't actually do a fully charged dropkick. The question is now, does she have the ability to do a fully charged dropkick? We have to wait for her to go from action 1 into action 2, and if I did it correctly, she becomes able to do a fully charged dropkick. This is the mechanism we intend to use for Nitro Charge. That is not fully charged. You can hear the difference in what she says. In fact, I think if I can get her to go 2 into 2, you will not hear that because I hopefully didn't charge 2 fully. In fact, as you can see, if she goes straight into 2, she doesn't even do a dropkick. I guess the animation is too fast. It's caught up in something else that I comboed it into. So that is not a full charge dropkick. That is, and the combo follows it. And this will keep going basically indefinitely. But 2 into 2, which we may eventually get to see again, doesn't specifically do anything. See? She never does another dropkick. This is the fundamental principle by which we're going to do Nitro Charges when we are building the AbigailBot. So if you don't get one from us, you don't have time to come by and check for a new one. We don't exactly know when we'll have the first data, but if you want to mess around with it on your own, if you bought Abigail or you bought the season pass and for whatever reason will get Abigail for free, even if you don't intend to play him, it would be better to know what to do against him than not. So that's where you're looking now. Now, what else does he do that we know of that's specifically helpful? Well, I should be able to change this. I should be able to change this to a similar thing to his EX stuff. And then it becomes a question of exactly what EX stuff are we talking about here? So I'm going to once again do this one, but I'm going to try to end it with EX Speech, just to have a difference in the way that the game flows relative to things. That's not EX. And I need to be closer altogether. But I'm not letting her actually finish that. Why? Because Abigail actually has been said to have a special ability with his punches to do the Abigail punch, what we might call the piston punch, more if he mashes the button more. Why is this useful? Because it allows you to start another action with a lot of punches that probably aren't going to become anything. Since you don't need the Nitro Charge to generally be at the beginning of anything, that's fine. In Mika's case, there is no such thing. There is no button that she gets to hit as a result of that will help. But we can do a specific thing. A specific thing that changes whether or not the setup here is good. Let's try this action. Now, Consider what happens when you don't have the option to do any other move at the time. That's all I'm going to do. But if you think about it, if you hit heavy punch and heavy kick together in neutral, and you're already in V trigger, the thing that comes out is a heavy kick. So first of all, this is going to come up for Abigail a lot. There are a lot of heavy punch things that he does, but there are also a couple good heavy kick things that he does. And those heavy kick things are going to stop certain things from happening only if you were able to do something else. For example, you can see here, even with her very quick recovery of V-trigger, when she goes from 1 into 1, she just does the regular short drop kick. If she goes from 1 into 3, however, the same thing will happen as before, even though what I actually hit at the beginning of this input was V-trigger and not heavy kick. This is because she doesn't have the option to do her V-trigger while in the animation for her charged heavy kick. Once she starts to do the heavy kick, she has to finish it. Hitting a different button doesn't change anything. This is super important for what Abigail does, because Abigail has a lot of moves where that's the case, where he can only go into a different thing that he's already planning to do. Unfortunately, Mika's a little bit harder to demonstrate this with because she doesn't have a lot of things like that, but she does have one or two things that I can use. So I want to turn off all the inputs now. I'm going to record something that's relatively useful for Mika players if you're not too familiar with it. Basically, Rainbow Typhoon is decently timed relative to her doing her V-skill. So I'm going to just do a Rainbow Typhoon and nothing in it. And then I'm going to do that. Once I get the timing right, but note, I held the button at the end of the recording again, which means I can, once again, start a recording where that is the thing that she actually does. I can start a recording where that is the main button she presses, but I can do other crazy things too. For example, there are certain moves that are so fast in terms of their startup that other moves won't mess them up. Or there are other things you can press together that one takes priority over the other. In fact, the question is, if I hit V-skill and throw together, what does Mika do? I want to turn on the input so I can verify that I'm doing it right and to demonstrate it in full. For various reasons, I've gotten relatively good at doing this. So she throws. Okay, that's good. But that means what now? That means if I turn on 4 and 5, is she going to stop doing the V-skill in order to throw? You see she throws normally. In fact, as long as I continue to hold the button, it counts her as holding the V-skill. Now that happened because there's another input in there, so I can get a short one. Or, if she keeps repeating 4 for long enough, you can get something even better. But mostly it turns into a quick. So she repeats 5, and she keeps going. So let's turn on number 1 again. And notice that now Mika can do a ton of damage. So Typhoon And now she begins to charge. Now, obviously she has a much lower chance of doing this for a long time if you don't have a whole bunch of actions where she does that. But that's actually relatively correct. The key here is that for Abigail, this is the thing you're going to have to use a lot of. But know that since I haven't given her any of the things that truly make her charge the heavy kick, she mostly will just have the standing one. But even that tiny chance of her doing this for longer changes the matchup against, say, a zoner. And similarly for Abigail, you will have things like his 4 Nitro Charge starters, and all you have to do is basically end every recording he has with Nitro Charge, regardless of whether or not the Nitro Charge is actually supposed to come out. And he also doesn't have a lot of heavy kick style moves where you care about this. He might have some good mediums, but I didn't see anything that impressed me. Another powerful thing, which is actually kind of strange, is that because you can do jump-ins with these buttons, you get even more options. So in the case of turning on just 3, as you know, 3 was the calling Nadeshiko. Well, while I'm calling Nadeshiko, I could presumably jump, and while I'm doing that, I could presumably hit other things. So, what should I do with this piece of information? Let's try recording just that, and since the Nadeshiko call will happen immediately, I can then press jump, and I can then press V-skill while in the air, and I can hold that. This is one of the things that Abigail is going to need for a lot of very strange mix-ups. Now I did that twice, but I shouldn't have, so here we go again. Now know that her jumping medium kick isn't that good, so it's not going to be as effective as on Abigail, who has a relatively good one. The key here is that I have to hold a lot of buttons, and that makes it very difficult to end the recording. When you're doing characters like this, it's best to set up your controller scheme such that, depending on how you're comfortable, it's easier to hold certain buttons, usually on the L triggers. And once you get used to pressing them, it's usually not so bad anymore. So I'm going to hold L2 and press up forward, and then I'm going to hold L1 and I'm going to end the recording. That was ended exactly like that. So that's decent. I mean, it's not really what I wanted, so I'm going to try one more. What I want is for her to be able to do something very close to an air-to-air. That might be too fast, but we'll see. So we see a lot of jumping here, but we also see there's a specific timing in which she can do the V skill on landing. That's interesting because now I can combine that with this. And she seems to want to charge up completely. And you'll note that because she's in the air, it turns her throw into a jumping light kick. This is also probably useful for Abigail, although I don't think his jumping light kick is that great. There are definitely times when having Abigail in the air is helpful though. Now, one other great thing is that Abigail's target combos, which I can't use on Mika because she basically doesn't have any. Abigail's target combos are basically hitting jab quickly. However, hitting jab quickly is also a really great way to start off with his actual piston hands, Abigail punch, whatever you wish to call it. So you could start an action with that, or do it fairly early into the action. Especially if you just go Nitro Charge into instant mashing light punch. Because you don't really have to let go of the Nitro Charge button, he probably doesn't run until you do. So if the game does give you the option to just hold Nitro Charge and mash punches, this is a good way to get at least one action where you can start with Nitro Charge and end with it, which will allow him to charge for a really long time. He will obviously occasionally stop because you have other actions to be used, but you can see a lot of stuff from here. Did I not change the button? I'm not even going to try to figure out where those came from. But, just to double check, because that would have been odd. No, I didn't change the button, so where exactly does that come from? Oh, right. Okay, makes sense. So you still see that even though Mika now has the option to do this as just a thing she does sometimes. Especially because the timing at which you hit one button, if it's close enough to a different button, it can change the move itself that comes out. It plinks at least somewhat. And since Abigail has a lot of things that have armor on them, you want to get a lot of movements in there. His V skill is even more useful in that regard because it is effectively a parry, and it's a parry that specifically has hit follow-ups. Being able to use a parry that has a hitting follow-up means that you can start an action with it and immediately hit the correct button. The good part of that is you can also hide other buttons in it because a parry, if it works correctly, will always work, and when it doesn't work correctly, it will definitely eat the next input. You could, for a better example, parry and hit jab a couple times. The reason for that being that if he is already doing his punches, then the parry, being medium punch and medium kick, will simply count as another punch input. So you can combine those factors to give him a parry that has light punches hidden in it, gives him good defense, and then as soon as he gets out of the parry, hit or not, hit a different button. Whatever the button that should follow the parry is. So you can see that R.Mika's behavior is very emergent. There's no specific thing she has to do. And it is using these different methods that let you change the way that bots behave without actually inputting any of the things that they end up doing. But let's just review what exactly she has. So we gave her a command throw that is followed by a heavy kick. It's not the strongest of heavy kicks, but command throws have a long animation, so maybe I could have put something else in there. The problem is that I would then have to fit it in the space to do that, and that's what's going to be challenging about recording Abigail properly. However, I could have done this differently, because while the command throw will usually eat up a lot of things if it whiffs, I can probably do this in neutral. I'll explain what I mean by doing this, and this is also important to Abigail. Rather than making the brimstone actually work, because I was only demonstrating that you could use it in that way to get meaties and so on, maybe the pressure isn't the important thing of the character. Maybe Abigail doesn't have a lot of wake up stuff that you need to try to get into a bot. So here, let's whiff the command throw. Let's even possibly hide the command throw in a different whiffed throw, sure. And the hard part here is obviously going to be that we're not going to hit the kick in that way. So I'm going to whiff a normal throw, whiff a command throw, and hold the trigger. Now you can see that that doesn't actually work in that speed. You have to be even faster. Kind of hard to do. Abigail's is not likely to be this difficult. The main reason this happens though is because if you don't hide the command throw properly, you'll be too slow. And that's still not hidden correctly because it technically probably isn't going to be Brimstone ever. It's probably lenient enough though. So now I have something where she just appears to grab at air repeatedly? What if I throw some Hadouken? Well, she has that. And she does have the command throw. She also appears to have a crouching locate. Sometimes the input leniency will help you with bots, but it's not really that usually meaningful because you tend to do off light buttons and other weird things will happen. The bot usually tells you which button to press so that the situation resolves itself. So I'm going to turn back on 3 and see what I get out of this. Oh, wait. Now it looks like it's working. The reason that happens is because a command throw input in the air cancels when you land. Another important thing for any considerations of Abigail. So now we're seeing extra movement, extra abilities come out. This is primarily because when she lands, she has the capacity to immediately do the command throw, simply because the command throw was input in the air. So throwing in some jumps into Abigail is looking like a good thing overall. In fact, inputs very similar to these are likely to be what Abigail ends up using. You can see that at least with this timing, if you could get her to come out of that in the way that Abigail cancels out of it or begins the run, we might get something really more powerful and useful. So turning everything back on for a little bit now that that change has been made. What she does now is throw in neutral a lot, and then mostly stand still. But fortunately, in case you weren't aware, most characters don't care what direction you're holding when you throw or use their V-skill. Unfortunately, Abigail does, and that's going to become more of an issue for him, but it depends on what we end up making the bot about. I expect that we're going to make the bot about a lot of crouching related things. But she'll throw and have her power-ups from result of the throw. And just relax. But I don't know how long she's going to spend on her Nadeshiko call. I don't actually technically know what direction she's doing it from. You could change it so that she does different ones. Oh, I created that combo. I'm familiar with it and I don't like it much. But she now has this ability. So, when you're thinking about how to create AbigailBot, you don't really have to spend a lot of time figuring out whether or not the specific things you're putting in are going to be exactly what you want him to do or all the things he can do. Just give him the ability to do a lot of different things by holding buttons or cancelling buttons. And see what he does first. And then start tweaking the things that he does. If you're interested in doing this for yourself, it's usually not too difficult. If you're focused on the main things that the character can do, and you understand which buttons to hold, you're more than likely going to be alright. Now, one thing that Mika has that isn't really as obvious and affects Abigail a lot more is whether or not you do an EX move. I have a way to demonstrate this, but it's a little bit more complicated than most things. So, let's assume that we want Mika to do her Lady Mika attack. And we know that she can do that there with those buttons. So I'm going to try to re-record action 2, I believe. Which is 1 heavy kick into combo into 2 punches. Now the difficult part of this sort of thing is that you have to figure out how to hit the end recording button despite having probably your left hand out of commission. It'll be much easier for Abigail because what you're trying to do with Abigail is a little different. But to demonstrate it, I'll do my best to hit all the buttons in question. Now this is much easier when you're used to doing it the other way because you're used to holding buttons when you need to hold them and not holding the buttons when you don't need to hold them. So my problem here is that I'm looking for a way to hit medium punch and light punch together and hold those buttons. I'm holding those buttons because if you're holding buttons at the end of an input, the game does not recognize that you hit those same buttons at the beginning of another input. This is what we were showing before. What you can do with this is to make the character have a change in what they do with an actual input at the start of a triple button. Can I use this for heavy? I think I can. Yeah, I can do that just in this case. Just to show off what is supposed to happen here. I'll do that instead. Now I ended that recording while holding medium punch and light punch. That means that if I were to hit heavy triple punch at the beginning of any input, you would only actually see the heavy punch. In fact, it's only useful for a very specific type of move, but Abigail is exactly the sort of character for whom I'm discussing. But I can actually show you what normally happens. Let's leave that on and turn on instead one of the ones where she starts the recording with throw. Now since I'm holding light punch at the beginning of this, technically, whenever she goes from 2 into 1, she shouldn't throw. I've managed to give her the take throw that goes with that. So if you're blocking, this continues to happen. But because that input is relatively fast, she has the capacity to just do light kick into brimstone. But she also has the ability to do that, which creates the brimstone mix-up. It all comes down to what she was holding at what time. With Abigail, this is much easier. All you would technically have to do is end any of his recordings holding one kick, and then the one recording where he has nitro charge, regular nitro charge, you can use that to start off with 3 kicks and give him ES nitro charge. But occasionally he wouldn't do it. The opponent would get used to seeing ES nitro charge, thinking they need to react to the ES nitro charge in a particular way, and then seeing a regular one. If this is a mix-up situation, the reason this becomes useful is whatever you want him to do more of after the nitro charge, whatever is most powerful after ES nitro charge, those things become the one you're inputting at the beginning of that. And all you have to do is find something, it doesn't even matter if it's actually a move, that he can input with the light kick. And in his case, this helps further. This helps further because if you can find the right timing for one of his other buttons, especially if you had at least one action that didn't end with nitro charge, it gives him a very small chance of doing his V reversal. Because if you start the recording with a forward triple kick and he happens to be in block stun, then he will V reversal. So now let's see the further tweaked version of Mika. She's now lost most of her ability to do the main dropkick setup, but that was in 3 anyway, so we didn't really need it to be there. It's nice because she was doing the proper combo before, but again, this is just for demonstration purposes. So now she relaxes a lot more, she hits different buttons in neutral. And you have to worry about it more when she gets close to you. This is what we're going for with Abigail, but what we want for Abigail himself is for him to be able to move away a lot more often because his spacing is based on that. Fortunately, he has finger guns backdash extraordinaire, and this can also be cancelled out of his nitro charge. So technically, you can have him play and open a motion with backdash, and he will cancel out of the nitro charge that he probably did, and backdash. This is good because it's very unlikely that you wanted anything else in the backdash. So let's look at the other inputs that Abigail is rumored to have. They're mostly simple. Since his command grab is a half circle back and kick, as far as I'm aware, which is the same as Mika's, that handles what I was mentioning before. Something to end a button, to end a recording while holding that button, without going into a nitro charge at that moment. This is good because it prevents the problem where you have to spend time of a recording trying to figure out what to put into a whipped command grab. So you have the fortune of being able to use a particular input, end it quickly, and then use something else that would be useful to you if he happened to be on the ground and couldn't do the thing that you wanted him to do. There are also other situations where you could decide whether or not he should have meter, and further situations where you could give him the ability to do full EX stuff only when he didn't use something else. It's a very common ability. So Mika's already been at least somewhat upgraded to be like that. Abigail's bigger problem is that he can't really cancel Nitro Charge in too much. But for the most part, we don't really want him to be staying there for very long. He does have some armor on it in particular states, but not enough of it that you really care. Rather, you want a lot of long periods where he's doing nothing, relatively, so that he can do Nitro Charge and run forward varying amounts of time. He's one of those characters who you probably need to find something to hit that doesn't interfere with the Nitro Charge motion too much. Fortunately, he is well equipped with those sort of moves as well. We can have him do things where he comes out of Nitro Charge very fast because you attack him, namely the parry. And we can have stuff where it's basically him waiting to hit you with a different button because he stays in the Nitro Charge. So the question is, if Abigail is actually charging Nitro Charge, and you start by holding the heavy kick or triple kick button, and you hit a different button while he's still charging, what exactly does Abigail do? Could you, for example, input motions during that time in case he got knocked down and couldn't start the Nitro Charge in the first place? There are a lot of good options there as well, but they're harder to demonstrate with R.Mika. So I'm either going to change character or try to show it off in one of those harder ways. Remember what I mentioned to begin with though. If she is holding heavy kick at the end of one recording and goes into another recording where she is starting with heavy kick and heavy kick only, the situation is good for that. If Abigail happens to hold his Nitro Charge even if you let go of one of the kicks, that's really useful too. He's got a good overhead and he's got some counter hit stuff in there. In fact, if the overhead is a particular input, you might even be able to fake some stuff with plinking and so on. So, in terms of what Mika can do, let's reduce what she's actually doing yet again to 1, 3, and 5. So she's now either going to have a dropkick charge, an Adeshko call, or just chill in there because she didn't actually end up doing a throw or actually trying to do her V-skill at all. In fact, you'll notice that with this setup, she's much less likely to ever actually do the V-skill. Whereas before, she did it a ton. Now she still can, but it's nowhere near as likely. This is because she has to be in a very specific state for that to end that way. In Abigail's case, you're mostly looking to figure out which move is the longest that you can hit with the button you want and do nothing else. If you watched the WSO sessions, Winner Stays On, this weekend, you were able to see Abigail's Giant Flip. Abigail's Giant Flip is a motion with a heavy punch that takes a fairly long time to execute. This is useful because it means that if you input that as a motion, you may get Giant Flip. Or you may get Abigail doing one of his heavy punches out of his charge. And you could also hold the button and charge up the punch itself. because it doesn't really matter. Giant flip is long. And how long you hold a button in an actual action doesn't affect much. So that's one thing that I definitely suggest, to do the giant flip as a start off of something. And leave him like that because firstly, he's not going to nitro charge, and secondly, you could hide a lot of things in there where he doesn't do anything else. Another good thing to check is to figure out what happens if you press nitro charge and then release it again to do the run, but then press it yet again. Will he stop? Will he cancel in a different direction? Will he just wait for you to hit a punch? If he does just wait for you to hit a punch, or some similar button, it means you can actually hide nitro charges in nitro charges. You can make short ones, long ones. The whole thing can be set up. You could nitro charge directly after doing giant flip, and then just hit the button again later, once, and hold the button then. There's nothing stopping you from getting a lot of mix-ups into one input because of the way that the buttons care about when you press them and not to press them. With Mika, because you have much less time, and because she doesn't have any move where she can press it, release it, and then be stuck in a state, it's much less likely to see these things the way they should be used. But Abigail is really unique in that he's probably the only character so far who has anything like that. In the long term anyway. Birdie has some stuff. But even Birdie can't charge that long. Birdie's own don't put him into a state where it matters. Bullhorn, while useful, doesn't create the sort of mix-ups from that activity that you'd get from Abigail's giant punch or similar. Now another piece of useful information is that if a character is in a certain state and you hit V skill while they're in the air or sometimes on the ground, you can actually get that to come off as a different move. I don't expect Abigail is going to be a character like that. I can't think of a situation in which Abigail will be in a state where hitting crouching V skill is going to do anything other than his V skill. Which is sort of a shame because apparently his crouching medium kick combos well into the Abigail punch. But there's another good part to it. Again, it comes down to whether or not hitting and holding medium kick will cause him to hold the nitro charge even if he started with different buttons. You could start the nitro charge with this input, the crouching medium plus light, and then hold that, end the recording, and then just start the next input with an instant crouch medium. Now the problem with this is if you're not familiar with how to do an instant crouch medium, it becomes relatively difficult. This is very much about being able to press the kick button slightly before, or at least for some people mentally it's slightly before the down direction. This is a difficult thing that we will probably include in our character challenges. It's not really... It's close to the timing skill required for the 1 frame length of Street Fighter 4, but there's a little bit more buffer, and it's a little bit less useful. Unless you're a Chun-Li player, or I think there's like one birdie combo that matters if you can do this or not. But if you can input that, then chances are that your Abigail will be able to hold a charge, but if they happen to not do that, if they happen to start off the battle with that, then they'll end up doing a combo instead. And if you then were to do Abigail punches, which is just a quarter circle forward motion, and end it, you'd be able to do a lot of things. In fact, if you did this and then EX, and could finish the recording in time, then you have a high chance of being able to mash light, or as I mentioned, when he goes into the V skill at the beginning of one of the nitro charges, that will happen instead. And you can set up a lot of situations where he lets go of nitro charge at different times and doesn't interrupt himself. So, I'm moving into the part of the video now that will most likely be in some way separated from the rest and put up for those who want to do quick things and just want a summary of what they're looking for and what they're probably trying to do to understand where we are starting from in terms of creation of actions and what they can test out. Feel free to send us what you come up with and maybe we'll incorporate it based on what we see. Let us know if you want credit for that. You can of course find the contact information at 2-mk.org. But for now, we're going into the explanation of what we are probably aiming to do with the recordings for AbigailBot as our main tests from the beginning, so that you can try this on your own. Please, of course, bear in mind that there is no specific way to get what we are hoping for out of the things I'm about to say. The first action will almost certainly be to press forward and triple kick to activate nitro charge for a very short time. Release the nitro charge. Press another button or direction that does not affect his run. Hopefully a heavy punch, but not necessarily. And immediately press it again. So, action 1 is very likely to be triple kick, quarter circle back and heavy punch, holding the heavy punch, holding the triple kick again, release the heavy punch to end the recording, holding triple kick the whole time. This should result in a nitro charge that starts and goes into a back heavy punch. If it's interrupted, it has the chance to do his giant flip. If he happens to be on the ground during that time when it would normally be dead space, he might just hit back heavy punch, or he might simply start another nitro charge. The second action we're probably going to use is a V skill followed by 1 or 2 jabs, probably, into probably forward dash. I would believe this helps, but it could also be standing heavy punch, depending on the juggles he gets off certain things. A forward dash that is most likely ended with just another nitro charge, without specifically making sure that the nitro charge happens after the dash. You could just hide it in the dash and we'll see what happens. This should give him the ability to do many more moves that are easier to buffer out of it without having to worry about this. And if you happen to get knocked down or spend a lot of time being relatively random, it's likely to work out fine. But the actual skill will just look like a V skill into some jabs into a forward dash when you replay it, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be a component of the recording that is capable of doing many things. From there, it's very likely that we'll be going with a regular throw sort of input, depending on what light punches do when he's dashing or when he's in nitro charge. A regular throw input, because throw inputs, while they're good for hiding things in, also are good for wasting time in neutral. So if he begins the action with the throw, and that doesn't cause anything in particular, it'll make the nitro charge start, because you wouldn't have been holding the nitro charge input, and he'll proceed from there. And at the end of that, probably just start another nitro charge. Or this might be the input where we do a backward motion and holding light kick. It might not have to be light kick, it could be pretty much any kick actually. But this is where the command throw will come from. And this is also useful because it can cause some really strange interactions as to when he does command throw itself. It might enable him to do command throw after parry in certain timings. It might help with just generally flowing forward. The fourth input is another one that possibly doesn't end with nitro charge, but can, definitely can. It depends on your skill in pressing the buttons, but I don't necessarily suggest one way or the other. This is the one I believe would be the easiest to input, where you simply attempt to do the instant crouch medium, and from there, just do quarter circle forward, and 2 punches, probably, and end the recording as soon as you get the combo from his crouching medium kick into the Abigail punch. Like, as soon as it connects, because this means that when this interacts with one of the other previous actions, you might get some mashing in there. If you really want to push yourself and try really hard, this is also the moment to push in the V skill. But note that, unfortunately, unless you want to give him a different V trigger timer, you can't do what I'm showing off here. A character who has a move that contains heavy punch will, while they're in their V trigger state, if you do the move with heavy punch and heavy kick, they will do the heavy punch move. So you can try to experiment with that a bit and see what you get. You can even do that, which, depending on how you input it, will create an ES version. And this is likely to be very useful for Abigail because, as I mentioned, you really want it to be that type of input. But for him, it would end up being really complicated because you'd end up like hitting all 4 buttons, which not everyone can do easily. Also, it causes throws to come out. So, the final input would most likely need to end with a nitro charge, but not necessarily start with one, and we need his overhead somewhere. Now, if the medium kick doesn't actually cause the overhead without pressing a particular thing, it means that we're going to have to put it in there, but I'm going to hope it does, and therefore trust that you can use his forward heavy punch in some way for this input. One thing that is very useful to do is to hide something in his sweep. His sweep is going to be really important, but most likely the way that we want his sweep to happen is instead of his V trigger. So, at that point you're looking to hit probably forward heavy punch and then V trigger, because if it cancels then you're good, and if it doesn't you'll get sweep somewhere. Plus it takes nice and long, so if a nitro charge does happen, it's not an issue. And one of the best parts of this is, assuming that you did everything correctly with the crouching medium kick into Abigail punches thing, if he whiffs the crouching medium kick, it won't cancel into the Abigail punch. But if he then does the exact same thing again, and you've done it really quickly, especially if you didn't go into the Nitro Charge. If his super is quarter circle, forward, twice, and punch, it will actually come out correctly because he will have done, as far as the game is concerned, 2 quarter circle forwards in the space of time required for this. You can see this behavior in the second action of AbigailBot. So once you've seen all these things in action, you can then work on figuring out whether or not there's a way to change these things to create even more interactions, or allow him to do even more moves if you desperately needed any of them. However, pressure strings are not really something you have to worry about too much when it comes to this sort of character. So we're going to figure that mashing light should be enough, especially if you mash standing light and it gives him something akin to his anti-airs. You'll get used to that sort of setup. So, I hope that you are able to use that information to make at least a preliminary version of AbigailBot for yourself. And of course, within probably 3 weeks to a month, we will have the completed version ready with an entire scoring system for anyone who has not come up with their own and didn't work with what I've just mentioned. Alright then, let's see what the Mika bot will get up to for a little while longer. Abigail is probably going to be one where you have to care a lot about when you're holding down back, and that's probably going to be the harder part of the bot. Getting yourself to hold the correct direction so that his defense isn't too terrible. Especially since I have a strong feeling that aside from the Abigail matchup, he's going to be a bot where learning to cross him up is going to be a very large part of the game. And learning the range of his normals, at least the main ones, is also going to be a relatively large part of the game. But he's not the easiest bot to cross up, so I expect we're going to see some weirdness. Despite his gargantuan size, the actual range at which you jump to cross him up is a little confusing. We may also need to put in more than one attempt at the B skill because he does have a high and a low. But for the most part, making you take on a bot as if you need to cross it up will create a situation where it's much more likely that you will see high counters working well. Now, I believe that it was demonstrated that he gets something off his high counter if timed perfectly, and that could be learnt and input possibly. But I'm not really sure how good it would be, because we're already looking at counter, jab, jab, and trying to fit some stuff in there. It might be a bit rough. Fortunately, he's not a character with too many moves. He has a good set of variations, and similar to AbigailBot, that makes it easy to figure out how to start him off. But the final tweaks to make him actually scary and or extra effective are definitely going to take us some time to get finalized. But either way, once again, look out for AbigailBot on to-mk.org. Send us email if you want to get the current working development version at any point in the process. And depending on how long we are able to work on it, we might get a beta version up somewhere along with or between 2 other bots for those who need the testing. Also, you should be able to pretty much at any time come onto the stream and ask a question about it, especially if I or Amar are the one streaming at the time. It'll most likely be that you might catch some work on AbigailBot being done between rounds in certain segments, And if we're fortunate enough, we might see something on Tuesday. Unfortunately, buying characters with fight money, which is the general way that we do this when we don't desperately need to have something done immediately, is usually disabled, and you can't do it while you're able to get online in the first place. So on Tuesday you should expect that if the maintenance is done, we don't like to spend a lot of time inputting bots in streams. This is left as an exercise to the viewer, and they can spend their time focusing on watching a fully input one. So that maintenance would have to end fairly quickly. Actually, I haven't seen any sign of it yet. As for our other bots upcoming, we definitely have the intention of releasing the birdie bot that you've been seeing sometime this weekend, most likely Sunday as usual. Just need to do final tweaks on the point system and have a couple more tests done. Fortunately, it is not a DLC bot, which increases the range of people that we have provided it to, and therefore the amount of data I can get. Similarly for Chun-Li and Fang bots, which are incoming, and on that note, I'll note that anyone who has actually seen the Chun-Li bot before now, the version that we are likely to release is not the one that I'm about to showcase, because the main concept of this bot is not something that is actually relevant to all characters. And as a result, we haven't specifically aimed for having this bot to be in its current state on the site. I may keep at least one part of what it does, but the current Chun-Li styles of play that have been seen at EVO in general, and by me obviously, it warrants further investigation. This version of the bot is my personal specific one, and it's much more likely to be the sort of thing that you see, where there's a lot of motion that is specifically intended to confuse the player, rather than motion that is intended to cause them to learn a particular thing. After all, familiarity with the character is something you can get from the CPU, but if you can't get the CPU to do certain things, then those things must be given to you by something or someone else, and we're going to endeavor to fill that space. Well, today we have a shorter stream than usual because of Friday in general, and because of the specifics of the content of the stream. We're not likely to have any matches on stream today, but you can definitely expect to see us fairly soon doing one thing or another. Weekends are the time we spend streaming other games or doing basics in Street Fighter that you can look into if you're interested. But of course, only our weekday streaming is on this particular schedule, so with that, I will see you all next week when BirdieBot is available, and hopefully toward the end of the week you'll get the first look at AbigailBot. Once again, this is Rillian for the 2MK group. Go get your bots, specifically BirdieBot, at 2-mk.org, and send us email there about anything that you need to know or would like us to prepare. Good night.